Hi there, and welcome back to the channel. This time I'll be talking about grand strategy in World of Tanks. While this isn't a strategy game, you'll benefit a lot from making the correct strategic decisions, and your win rate will improve as a result. There are a lot of traps you can fall into this game strategy-wise, and falling for them typically causes a bad, but moreover, a game that's simply not fun to play. Conversely, if you make good strategic decisions, you can save games that are otherwise unwinnable. Today I'm going to try and teach you a version of the decision-making process that you can apply in the game. The first thing you do in battle is drive to a flank. Picking a flank is the first major decision you'll make in every game. As a rule of thumb, I suggest you go with your team, or at least their majority. This maximises the chance you'll win the opening engagement and allow you the chance to win the game overall, because you will have more tanks at your disposal, at your team's disposal at least. In another video, I detail how to win the engagement once you're in it, so if you're interested more in that area, more on the mechanical aspects of winning, then I suggest you have a look at that. I'll pop a link down in the description to help you find it. In the context of strategy though, I would stick to this formula. One of the most common traps in this game is travelling to a flank alone at the start of a game. Even if you're in a top tier heavy, the game will unfold quickly for you if the enemy figure out you're alone. The reason this happens is if you're in a fight, you fire and begin your reload. In that window of time, the enemy tanks have free reign. They can move closer, they can flank you, they can do whatever they want because you can't stop them and have no cover. Even if you're up against lower tier tanks, only 2 or 3 of them are needed just to swarm you. It's very rare that you have the damage output and the survivability to deal with multiple tanks alone at the start of the battle. You don't have to constantly look at the map to get a sense of the battle. In the PC version, the map shows where the enemies were last spotted, giving you an idea of who's where. When you should act on the information is a different matter. The underlying concept here is to be in position first. If you keep glancing at the map, you'll be able to tell easily which way an enemy is likely to go. They either drive to you, well, where your teammates are because you're spotted, or your base, either to kill artillery or cap it out. Tanks that win fights always drive forwards. If you need some extra confirmation, friendly tanks are spotting to the point of their death, so if they die, enemy tanks will kill them and immediately after will typically move on in the direction they're heading. They very rarely change direction after winning the fight. So how can you use this to your advantage and make the correct strategic decision? Well, it all boils down to where you and your remaining teammates are on the map. If you have to pick out where your team is at its strongest on the map and position yourself to assist and make it as strong as possible. For this part, I'm going to go through some examples and talk about which decision would be best. Right, enough theory, let's bring in an example. Consider yourself as the medium tank highlighted on screen. You're currently situated on the hill near the centre of the Karelia map. It's a fairly decent position. You can shoot at the fight below you or easily switch to the central swamp if anyone wants to try and make a mad dash for your base, or go through the middle to flank up to the north. You notice your team has won the top left corner of the map. The enemy only sent 3 tanks while your team sent 5. Your remaining teammates now are advanced towards the enemy base from the north. This is where a good position will win you the game. The enemy have campers situated in their base, and because they elected to send only 3 tanks to the same flank as your team sent 5, they are not lacking on resources on the other flank, so it could go either way there. This push by your victorious allies could easily end in an overextension. An example of a good position to counter this, in this case, would be to go forward into this area. Specifics would depend on what exact tank you're driving, how much health you're on, how close you need to get to spot the campers. But the idea is you would be able to spot them in the enemy base for your teammates and engage them possibly. Spotting the campers will prevent them from peeking and shooting without return fire, allowing your teammates to close the distance and threaten the cap. Even if they shoot you, your teammates aren't getting shot at, so there is benefit there. Enemy tanks fighting in the southeast may fall back and attack you, but this does 2 beneficial things. Firstly, the balance of the fight in the southeast tips in your team's favour because there are less enemy tanks fighting for the enemy. And secondly, it opens the attacking enemies up to a crossfire with your allies in the north, depending on their exact positions, obviously. It is possible that you would die getting into this position, but it does create a vacuum of fire and tanks. You have successfully removed the attention of 4 tanks from the battle. That's 4 tanks that aren't hitting your allies. If you can determine that they're aiming at you, just survive as long as possible. Don't even peek. Every second you buy is important. You must also consider the timing of when to go into this position. It may be strong, but if you reach it at the wrong time, you might just end up being destroyed for relatively little gain. Let's tackle going too early. You decide not to wait for your allies in the north and push into the position before they begin advancing. You spot the campers, they spot you. The difference between this example and the previous one is the positions of your allies. They are nowhere near relevant as they can't help split the fire or force the campers back. As such, you're already in a 2v1, possibly a 3v1 if one of the tanks comes back as before in the initial example. You have no chance of winning and are quickly destroyed. Whether this loses the game or not depends on what your allies in the north do when you're getting pumped full of lead. The worst case scenario is they saw you in your position and thought, oh, we don't need to push because this legendary player has moved up already and will spot for us. They'll then sit in the corner of the map and take pot shots from afar, not really doing anything. It's possible that they'll push up while the enemies are focused on destroying you, but what I've found is that most of the time when an enemy tank is spotted, especially when they can shoot at it, friendlies will just stop where they are and try and aim at them. So, how to avoid this? When is it not too early? Well, I have a simple but selfish solution. The essence of it is, don't go first. In this situation, wait for your friendlies to go and push from the north. If you go first, the decision is left with your teammates and whether to back you up. We all know how that ends. If you wait for them to make the decision and then play off of it, you can save yourself a few needless deaths. What about being too late to a position? Well, the situation still plays out the same as going too early, but in a different order. You are still in your original position while your allies in the north attempt to push the campers. Now, it's possible that they could beat the campers. Every game of World of Tanks is different. They could have better suited tanks for the push, the campers could be having trouble aiming, or either side could be just getting lucky or unlucky with their RNG. Let's assume the worst in this example. Your team pushes the base from the north. The campers only have one line to defend. They commit to fighting each other, and your team will be losing. You realise what is happening too late and take the same position as in the initial example, but you don't spot or shoot that much. Why is this? The whole point of finding good positions on the map is so you can shoot without being shot, and they work because when you are making your way towards them, you aren't spotted. As mentioned before, the typical behaviour of a tank since it was last seen is fairly predictable. By changing position when unspotted, you open up new spotting and shooting lines for your team without the enemy team knowing until you get spotted again. An enemy tank could drive right in front of your new position because they assumed that, like most others, you would still be roughly where you were last spotted. In the initial example, repositioning benefited your team because the campers didn't know you had moved until it was too late for them. They assumed you were still fighting in the south and left themselves open to a crossfire. However, in this later repositioning example, it provides no benefit to your team because the campers have committed to fighting your allies in the north. They abandon covering the centre, but at the same time remove your opportunity to shoot back at them. Now, onto a different but more clear-cut aspect of strategy, the capture circle. Seen by many as a cheap way to win, sitting in this location for a certain amount of time will win you the game, regardless of the remaining tanks left on each team. It can grasp victory from the jaws of defeat and vice versa. In standard battles, not only do you have to fight the enemy tanks, but you have to defend your own capture circle. It can be very difficult to choose whether to attack or defend. Here I want to bring a small table in, which serves as a rule of thumb for knowing when to attack or defend. At its simplest, it boils down to this: did you win your first fight, and did your allies win theirs in other parts of the map? In the top left, it's fairly obvious. If you win your fight and your allies win theirs, you almost certainly attack. Chances are this is not going to be a close game, and it's going to be in your favour, so maximise your impact, get forwards, spot the remaining enemies. In the bottom right, the opposite situation. If you've lost your engagement and your allies have lost theirs in other parts, chances are the game is going to be over anyway, and you should focus on squeezing as much damage out as possible before you die. And then in the top right, where you win and your allies lose, it can be tempting to simply push and attack. Going back the way you came can feel like a waste of time, especially in slower tanks. However, I'd recommend going back to defend almost every time if this is the case, because in most cases you'll create a better game. Firstly, the cap circles are almost always completely open, and once an enemy drives in, you'll know about it because of the audio and video cues. It's not hard to get shots on capturing enemies. Secondly, you'll get more XP than normal for interrupting a capture, which helps for grinding. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, you open up the game again, giving your team a chance to either turn around and help or cap the enemy's base. Even if the enemy elect not to cap and try and flank your remaining teammates, you'll know about it because you went back. Lastly, in the bottom left, what if you lose and your allies win? This situation, for obvious reasons, is largely out of your hands. Even if you survive, it's going to be down to your teammates who won their engagement to make the difference. If you can, though, I would suggest you disengage from your loss and try and join them. You've got to do everything in your power to support your remaining teammates without dying. Failing that, if you can't escape, try and make yourself as awkward to kill as possible. Obstruct lines of fire, fight in a ditch or swamp that enemies have to drive through to kill you, or perhaps lure them into a spot where your friendly tanks can get shots on them when they're finishing you off. You want to maximise the time your team has to make a decision. There is another aspect I would like to address, and that is the no-cap, kill-all mentality. This, as it sounds, is the decision to ignore capturing the base and kill all remaining enemies, even if you make it all the way to their base. But is this the correct decision? To answer that, it's fairly simple, and it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to win the game at all costs, definitely cap. This maximises your chance of winning, and it may be your only chance if your team is outnumbered. If you're going for damage and XP gain, I wouldn't suggest capping most of the time. It's far more valuable to deal damage and get kills than it is to cap. The only exception to this is when you've had a good game, but it looks like your team is still going to lose. If you're grinding XP, you'll probably want to cap in this case, as there is a substantial XP multiplier for winning, regardless of the method. To break it down a little bit more mathematically, you get a flat 50% XP multiplier for winning any game of World of Tanks, regardless of whether you capture the base or kill all the enemies. The amount of XP you get for damage and kills is very hard to calculate, with the exception for shooting higher tier tanks, which provides a 10% bonus per tier above your own. It appears that you do receive a bump in XP for getting kills, but your main source of XP is damage. So if you find yourself and your team steamrolling the enemy and you're at the enemy base, I would say that if you think you can get 2 shots off, or especially a kill, before the game ends, you'll receive about the same, if not more XP than you would have for capping. Keep in mind the biggest multiplier is the one for winning, that massive 50% boost. So if it's not the case that you're steamrolling enemies, but you think you can get to the remaining enemies and get some more damage off, make sure you don't throw away the game, because you'll be throwing away that large 50% boost. To illustrate this, as well as a few other concepts I want to bring forward, consider this second example. You're the highlighted medium tank again on the Mountain Pass map. You spawned in the north and decided to go to the eastern side of the map and fight there. You and your allies successfully win that side of the map and reach Sector D7. It's here that you can and should make a decision. Looking at your map, you can see that your remaining allies are losing in the west to a large group of enemies. What do? Let's go through each direction you could go at this point. For the purpose of simplicity, your allies are going to go with you in each example. However, you'll quickly realise this happens less often than you would like in your games. Your teammates have their own minds and do whatever they want. Linking back to the don't go first solution in the last example, I suggest you wait for your allies to make their own decision. Even if it's going the wrong way, you will typically do better together than going the right way on your own, purely because of the concentrated firepower you now have with you. First up, you could carry on towards the enemy base along the east and then down south. What does going this way accomplish? Firstly, you can at least threaten capturing the enemy base. This will draw attention from campers, possibly some tanks who are paying attention on other flanks. This can tip the scales of the battles occurring across the map in your team's favour, regardless of how well you do. You also gather information about what the enemy has defending their base, which helps you make your next decision on whether to try and cap or not. But what are the downsides of this? The obvious one is you're stretching your team as thin as possible, essentially removing strategic options. By heading this way, you have no chance of supporting your teammates in the west directly, and your play can be fairly easily predicted by the enemy. You only have one real way to travel. You don't defend your cap circle, so even if you succeed in the push all the way to your base, you may simply be not fast enough. The enemy could just capture it before you do. Also, due to the design of the map, you can leave yourself open to being flanked from the central riverbed, which results in a grisly end to your push usually. So in concept, you would probably only consider this direction as the best one if you felt that capping was your only real option for winning. Next up is heading into the riverbed. Why is it beneficial to go here? Well, the main difference between this location and the previous one is you can have a lot more direct influence on the battle in the west, possibly enough to turn it into a Pyrrhic victory there. You can also head south from there and either flank back up through to the west because your friendlies are holding up the enemy, or go further south and threaten the enemy cap. Out of your three choices, this one is the most beneficial in terms of variety. You aren't fully committing to a single overall play and can adapt to the changing game. However, you're driving into a very risky spot on the map. It's arguably the most exposed position on the entire map. Even if an enemy is paying attention, you can be easily caught out and destroyed. The point of no return, I would say, is the bridge at E6. There is little cover after that once you pass it. Overall, this position still gives you a lot of options, but you have to be confident in knowing where the enemy team is so they can't interrupt you. If you get spotted trying to make a play here, it's likely you're going to get killed. To that end, I want to bring forward another point, and that is clearing a flank. When you win a fight, such as you have in this example, successfully push the enemy and take out their frontliners, make sure you kill all of the tanks on the flank, or at least in your engagement area. One of the traps you can fall into in this game is to successfully push, kill a couple of tanks, leave one or two alive because they're in an awkward position or your teammate is much closer, and find something else to do. Whatever the reason, you want to deal with as many tanks as you can before they can fall back, because if you leave any alive and turn around or go in a different direction, you can leave yourself to be vulnerable to being pincered by the enemy. So the ones you left alive can just come back, realizing that you've gone in a different direction, and then come in behind you when you're fighting in the new engagement that you've picked. And finally, we have going back the way you came in order to defend the base. In terms of the table I showed previously, this would be a situation where you've won and your allies are losing, so I would recommend taking this option in most cases. This is because while it doesn't threaten the enemy cap circle and commits you to a certain defensive play, the result of the game is better for you regardless of what happens. Either you go back and successfully defend the base, building up damage and kills and overall having a more exciting game, or you go back and unfortunately lose. But why is it better even if you lose? Well, you go back, get some shots off, die, and the game ends. If you hadn't gone this way, the enemy would be threatening your cap, and depending on the prevalence of the no cap kill all mentality, would either capture your base while you're too far away to do anything about it, or try and hunt you down after killing your allies defending the base. The point is, you must try and defend the base because it doesn't matter how many tanks you have, how much damage you've racked up, etc, etc. If the enemy tanks sit there in that circle, you will lose, and the game just won't be fun. One of the key concepts I hope you will have picked up on in these examples is the concentration of firepower. It's typically the key factor in determining who's going to win each fight. It's why I've been trying to push home the importance of following your allies wherever they go. If you're alone, it's just you, but if you have one ally, your damage output increases by roughly 100%. Instead of a tricky 1v1, you can comfortably take out an enemy tank between yourselves. Sticking with your allies or covering them in the mid to late game is extremely important, because as more tanks on your team die, your remaining allies become a larger and larger proportion of your remaining firepower and view range. Sticking together like this is an actual military strategy called force concentration. Your concentrated force bears down and fights a portion of the enemy force and overwhelms them. While you may be outnumbered overall, in that scenario, you heavily outnumber the enemy and quickly destroy them. The most famous examples I found of this in real life were Napoleon and Stonewall Jackson, but there's a mechanism in World of Tanks that makes this strategy even more useful, and that is hit point pools. Take the engagement just shown. Your 3 tanks find the enemy's 1 and the fight starts. Now in real life it is entirely possible that the enemy could win this fight because in the real world the tank can be destroyed in 1 hit, and of course spotting an opposing tank doesn't put a big red symbol and outline over them. In World of Tanks, however, it is almost guaranteed that the 3 tanks will win because it is clearly defined by their remaining hit points as to how many shots they can take before they are destroyed. Here, even if the enemy fires first and they have more health than each of the allied tanks, they have to risk being shot 3 times before they've reloaded and are still favoured to lose the fight. The big games featured on YouTube, especially ones with Kolobanov's medals, where you stand alone against 5 or more tanks and win, will often be accompanied with commentary that advises you to get stuck in, attack, don't sit back and camp if you're the one standing alone. This is to avoid this eventuality happening to you. You can win a 1 versus 5 situation if you take on each enemy individually, but your chances of winning significantly decrease if you let the enemy group up and you have to take on multiple tanks at the same time, because this situation will play out with you on the receiving end. And that concludes this video. I hope it illustrated the more strategic decisions you can make in this game, especially with regards to positioning. I think just playing the game will show you where the good spots are, but I have tried to show in this video the underlying reasons for the positions and the importance of timing. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe. It's the kind of content I'll be making for a while. All that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.